On a stifling July night in 1912, Herman Rosenthal bounced into the Metropole Cafe on West 43rd Street in Manhattan. Rosenthal, a gambler, had recently fallen on hard times, and had begun complaining about the long-standing system of pay-offs between gamblers and police that kept New York's riotous Tenderloin district running profitably. On this tonight, he seemed in high spirits and was brandishing a copy of the New York World, in which he had gotten a young reporter named Herbert Bayard Swope to publish Rosenthal's claim that a police lieutenant named Charles Becker was his partner in a gambling house. Now, however, Becker had shut it down because Rosenthal wasn't turning over enough of the take. "What do you boys think of the papers lately?" he shouted jovially to a group of fellow gamblers at a nearby table. "You're a damned fool, Herman," one replied. Toward 2 a.m. a man entered the cafe and asked Rosenthal to step outside. The gambler walked out the door and paused on the steps as 4 gunmen closed in on him. He took 3 bullets in the face and 1 in the neck. The killers piled into a gray Packard and rode off, giving the nation a preview of how gangland shock troops would operate in the mechanized 20th century. The Rosenthal case was more than a murder. The furor it set in motion made one-man governor, established Swope as one of the leading newspapermen of his generation, and sent Charles Becker to his death. The only American policeman ever to go to the electric chair. Charles Becker was born in 1870 in the village of Callicoon Center, Sullivan County, New York. His parents were German-American immigrants from Bavaria. Becker moved to New York City as a young man in 1890 and went to work as a bouncer in a German beer hall just off the Bowery. By any standards, Becker was a hard man. He stood over 6 feet tall, weighed 215 pounds, could kill a man with a punch. In November 1893, he joined the New York City Police Department. In the fall of 1896, Becker gained wide attention when he arrested Ruby Young on Broadway because the known prostitute was in the company of popular writer Stephen Crane, the author of The Red Badge of Courage. The next day, at Ruby Young's hearing, Crane stepped forward and defended Young. Crane's popularity carried weight in court at the sentencing of Young, and Magistrate Robert C. Cornell dismissed the case. Afterward, Crane told reporters, "If the girl will have the officer prosecuted for perjury, I will gladly support her." 3 weeks later, Young filed formal charges against Becker. Feeling vulnerable, Becker gathered evidence, hired experienced defense counsel, Lewis Grant, and rallied the support of his colleagues. Becker made a powerful entrance to his trial on October 15, 1896, surrounded by a phalanx of policemen. Commissioner Frederick Dent Grant, son of Ulysses S. Grant, headed the proceeding. After almost 5 hours of examination, Becker was acquitted. He learned about the power of the badge and how he could call on his colleagues for help. In 1902 and 1903, Becker was one of the leaders of a patrolmen's reform movement agitating for the introduction of the 3-platoon system. It would have significantly reduced the number of hours that the beat police officer was expected to work. In 1906, he was seconded to a special unit working out of police headquarters to probe the alleged corruption of Police Inspector Max F. Schmidberger. The inspector had earned enmity among patrolmen for giving detailed testimony to the 1894 Lexo Committee investigating police corruption in New York. Partly because of Becker's work, Schmidberger was subsequently prosecuted. Deputy Police Commissioner Rhinelander Waldo was so satisfied with Becker's work that when he was appointed as New York City Police Commissioner in 1911, Waldo appointed Becker to a lieutenant as head of one of the city's 3 anti-vice squads. Becker allegedly used his position to extort substantial sums, later shown to total in excess of $100,000, from Manhattan brothels and illegal gambling casinos, in exchange for immunity from police interference. Percentages of the take were regularly delivered to politicians and other policemen. The area was under the patronage of Tammany Hall's leader, Big Tim Sullivan. Herman Rosenthal, a flamboyant Estonian immigrant, who ran several illegal casinos in what was known as the Tenderloin D district, was irritated by a police raid led by Becker on one of his casinos and the damage they left. He complained to the press that Becker collected 20% of the take. In July 1912, Becker was reported by the New York World as one of 3 senior police officials involved in extorting money from Rosenthal's casinos. Manhattan District Attorney Charles S. Whitman, who had made an appointment to interview Rosenthal before his death, alleged that the 4 gangsters had committed the murder at Becker's behest. Amid a major public outcry following the murder and extensive press coverage, Becker was transferred to the Bronx and assigned to desk duty. As soon as Swope got word of the murder, he called the district attorney, Charles Whitman, and urged him to get out of bed and take over. Whitman saw his chance. An ambitious man, he knew that police corruption was a surefire reform issue. He had Becker arrested for engineering the murder. The prosecution never suggested that Becker even knew the 4 men who had pulled the triggers on Rosenthal. Intermediaries supposedly had arranged the crime. The trial and execution of the gunmen, Gyp the Blood, Whitey Lewis, Lefty Louie, and Doggo Frank, was only a sidelight of the real event, the trial of Charles Becker. In the weeks before it came to court, Whitman leaked to Swope increasingly gaudy stories of Becker's wickedness. By the time the trial began, national interest was fierce enough for the testimony of one bald Jack Rose to command more newsprint than the sinking of the Titanic had a few months before. Rose, one of the gamblers through whom Becker was said to have hired the murderers, claimed the lieutenant had told him, "It was a pleasing sight to me to see that squealing Jew lying there, and I would like to have cut out his tongue and hung it on the Times building as a warning to future squealers." Becker never got out from under the cloud of that brutal statement, even though the man who quoted it had been a rival of Rosenthal's and had been given immunity by Whitman to testify against the policeman. In fact, as Andy Logan points out in Against the Evidence, her meticulous and absorbing account of the scandal, the major prosecution witnesses, all carefully shielded by Whitman, had at least as much stake as Becker in getting Rosenthal out of the way. The judge presiding, John Goff, was a sweet-faced man said to look like a figure in a stained glass window. According to defense attorney Lloyd Stryker, however, he had a cold heart and a sadistic joy in suffering. A longtime cop hater, he threw every possible obstacle in the way of the defense. On one of the hottest days of the year, he told a member of the prosecution to have the shades drawn low. There is not enough gloom in the courtroom. At the end of the trial, he virtually instructed the members of the jury to find Becker guilty. They did. In the death house, at Sing Sing, the policeman seemed a different man from the one who had bitten up whores in the Tenderloin. He helped the prison chaplain conduct Bible classes, and began to read Shakespeare. In 1913, the Court of Appeals overturned the verdict, calling it shockingly against the weight of evidence. Becker said, "This proves that no frame-up can go to a finish." But a second trial, fiercely prosecuted by Whitman, upheld the first verdict. Becker spent his time reading aloud to his fellow prisoners and writing awkward, grandiloquent letters to his wife, whom he called Queen of My Heart, and whose belief in his innocence never wavered. As the execution day drew close, his only hope lay in an appeal to the governor, Charles Whitman, newly elected largely on the strength of his prosecution of Becker. Whitman refused the plea. He signed Becker's death warrant in 1915, and attended the execution. Becker was executed by the electric chair in Sing Sing on July 30, 1915. The process took 9 minutes, appearing to cause the man intense agony. For years afterward, it was described as the clumsiest execution in the history of Sing Sing. Becker is the only policeman to be executed for murder in the history of the United States. Becker was interred at Woodlawn Cemetery, the Bronx, on August 2, 1915. He was buried next to his daughter. Thank you for watching Death Row.